Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Start us off with the traditional request that when you speak, if you could turn your microphone on, because we are live on the internet. And I'm going to start with apologies. Do you have any apologies for absence?
Yes, just the one, Chair, from Councillor Thomas. Thank you.
Next item, minutes of the meeting of 5th of November 2024, pages 5 to 16. Members, we have before us the minutes from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting on the 5th of November. Are you content for me as Chair to sign these minutes? I'll need a proposer and a seconder for that. Thank you.
I'll propose the minutes.
Thank you. Please can we have a show of hands to indicate whether you support the motion for me as Chair to sign the minutes? Any against? And any abstentions? Thank you. That's carried. Announcements. We have a joint meeting of this committee and the Audit and Governance Committee on the 29th of January. Hopefully you've all seen the invite for that. Seeing some nods, that's good. If you haven't, let us know. That's going to be a special meeting to scrutinise the budget, as was explained in the invite, and hopefully as many people as possible can make that. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, please? None. In which case, we move on to the first substantive item of the agenda, which is the draft parking strategy for 2025. And I'm going to invite Councillor Tim Hoskin to introduce his report.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the invitation to bring this draft report. So this draft version of the parking strategy presents to the Overview and Scrutiny members a version which we'd like challenging and thinking through following our public consultation and engagement. With two recommendations. The first one is to consider and provide comments on the parking strategy, Appendix B, to myself for consideration prior to the exec meeting and council. And the second one is to comment on the proposed changes effective from April 2025 for consideration by the executive as described in paragraph 2 of the proposals. So by way of background, it's largely in response to the climate emergency and in line with East Hart's corporate plan that this parking strategy has been designed. It is also against a backdrop of financial necessity. In February 2024, Council approved a 1.75 million income target for parking for financial years 25-26 and 27-28, through to 27-28, beg your pardon. This strategy sets the strategic context and principles by which changes may be approved to support the achievement of income and the wider ambitions of the Council. In August 24, officers commissioned CitySense to support the development of the strategy. And following the adoption of the Listening Council principles, we had an engagement which I think we would say was successful. We've got just over 1,700 responses, either online or in person, in autumn 2024. And you can see the consultation report as laid out in Appendix A. The three strategic aims of the parking strategy and they're centred around sustainability, community wellbeing and economic prosperity, which link back to the corporate plan and other associated strategies as listed on page 6. In a number of areas, pricing is used as a behavioural change tool. The strategic aims have guided the three key objectives which determine the actions for delivery: alternative, balanced and considerate. So alternative, we present motorists with the options to consider as alternatives as to whether that is a choice to take up more environmentally friendly vehicles and sustainable alternatives to driving. Balanced, to make a more balanced approach to parking by making changes to make it fairer, easier and more consistent across East Hart. And considerate, adopting a more environmentally considerate approach to managing parking services throughout East Harts. There are 22 actions which underpin those objectives. I'm not going to read them out, they're laid out in the paper, but they do fall into short, medium and long-term categories. To be successful in delivering these actions, the Council recognises that it cannot be the direct deliverer of change in all instances, and certainly can't operate alone. We must work with partners to maximise our impact. And to this end, we will adopt a number of roles as follows. Be direct deliverer for change, act as a facilitator for change, and play a lobbying role for change. And I'll give way at that stage and open up the debate.
We're open it for discussion. I want to thank Councillor Hoskin and the officers for this very comprehensive report and really encouraging the levels of consultation response. I know we don't always get that level of response, so it's great that we did. So, does any member wish to comment or ask a question about the report? Who's going to start us? Councillor Buckmaster.
Everyone's so shy. Yeah, I read through sentiments around behaviour change, and I think we know that it's something that's difficult to achieve generally. I mean, I was just, as I was looking through the report, I was remembering my working career as a salesman, and I'd prepare proposals for customers, quite significant proposals, and of course they'd always go straight to the back page to look at the bottom line. What's it going to cost us? I haven't quite done that, but reading between the lines, I can see some of the thinking around some of the movement of people, for example, to Northgate End, which of course, again, I'm reading between the lines here, that would potentially free up assets for sale at a later date. I mean, you may not wish to comment on that, but I think that could be a possibility of freeing up assets. The other thing that jumps out at me, and I'm being parochial for a change, looking at, that is rare for me, I'm looking at Sawbridgeworth, and of course, the change from long term to short term would make 155% or 55% increase on charges for people doing 1 to 2 hours, which is a really steep jump. And of course, it's a reduction in long-term parking, which then encourages more commuting use, because it's actually significantly less than station car park. I know it's really difficult to balance all of these things, but I actually see such a big increase for the short term as being a real problem. So somebody going, because all of the facilities there in the centre of town, and while a lot of people walk, there are people who need to take their cars. So somebody going for a doctor's appointment, for example, would end up paying an awful lot more than they're used to. So I just thought I'd mention that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. I too will be parochial, and it's an issue that I have raised in a previous meeting of some description. But if you go to page 118 of the pack, and this is around the list of charges, I'm struggling to understand the rationale. And if this is about it being equitable, it doesn't read as equitable. So Stansted Abbots is a village in East Hertfordshire. It is not a town. But Buntingford, Sawbridgeworth, and the others are. There's 5 of them. But for some reason, Buntingford continues to have 1.5 hours of free parking. Sawbridgeworth only have 30 minutes, and so does Stansted Abbots. But more starkly for me is that Buntingford don't have any charges at weekends at all. Sawbridgeworth don't have any charges at weekends at all. Yet Stansted Abbots village residents and visitors are charged to park there at weekends. And I'd be interested to understand the rationale for that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think just in amongst that, it's worth pointing out that we've reduced the charges in Stansted Abbots. we've reduced the charges in Stansted Abbots following the loss of the sponsorship. Which
Sorry, I didn't say that with the microphone on. That reduction is after an increase of last year.
Clearly, yes.
That was new.
No, absolutely. And I was going on to say about as a result of the sponsorship being removed, the parking has never been free in Stansted Abbots, but this is a well-worn argument. However, I think it's worth noting that and we talk about short, medium and longer term implementation of this strategy. So part of the consideration, and it's not as simple as this, but crudely it falls into the immediate prices that we can change, and that's in April this year. And those changes which we will need further mechanisms in order to be able to effect. So things like changing the use from long-term to short-term, or even introducing charges on days where there aren't currently charges, will be subject to further consultation and TROs, and that's in the more medium-term category. And that process, I'm advised, will take upwards of 2 years in order to be able to do. So the immediate prices you can see as on the schedule that you've just drawn our attention to on 118. But the longer term intention is that we produce a better alignment across smaller destinations than the main towns of Bishop Stortford and Ware and Hertford. So that will be part of the second, if you like, the second arrangement which we will do, which you'll advise on us on this evening, I've no doubt. So sorry, just a long way around of saying that's why some of the anomalies are there, because the anomalies can't be ironed out at this stage without traffic regulation.
Sorry, can we have an answer on the percentage increase short-term parking at Sawbridgeworth? That's a 55% increase.
I think you introduced that by changing long-term to short-term, wasn't it?
No, what I'm saying is that I spotted the reduction in charges for all-day usage, but the short term, so 1 to 2 hours, is actually a very big increase. It's 50-odd%, depending on whether it's 1 or 2 hours. But what the paper doesn't say is how much increase in revenue the council will get for that. I suspect that a very large proportion of people who use Bell Street car park are medium-term, short-term users. So, in fact, the revenue will go up considerably because actually we're penalising those residents who are there for, I mean, there's not a lot, you know, there are very small shops and businesses going to hairdressers, that kind of thing. So people tend not to be there a very long time. So what I'm saying is it's encouraging commuter usage because it's relatively cheap, but actually the vast majority of people who want to use the car park for their day-to-day transactions will be paying an awful lot more.
Okay, thank you. I understand. Yeah, I think I'd prefer if we steer away from emotive language like punishing people. We're not out to punish people. What we're about is trying to close a significant gap in this council's finances. So when we mention sustainability, it's as much about financial sustainability as it is about my own brief of environmental sustainability. And that has to come about through the levers that we've got, and there are precious few, as we know as councillors, that we can actually exercise in order to be able to close that gap. We can't lift the council tax more than the prescribed 2.9%. We can't move that. We can raise certain charges within our optional services, not non-statutory services, and we can sell things. And we can raise car parking fees, and this is one element of those. So rather than punishing people, this is about making sure that this council is financially sustainable and that there is an equitable transfer of services that we deliver. And none of this isn't, you know, we don't deliver car parks for free. There are costs associated with car parking. The more detailed question, Eric, I'm going to have to come back to you as to what we estimate this to be within Sawbridgeworth. I haven't got that to hand, so my apologies for that, but we can provide that, I'm sure, within the modelling that we've done.
If I could just add a follow-up. So I think the key thing around this strategy is us trying to recategorise our car parks and adding that rationale around why some areas are have different prices. So there's almost an element of us trying to look at the past, because you could argue, why was Sawbridge Rough so cheap compared to other areas previously? So what we're trying to do is align some of those pricing. So you'll see that Sawbridge Rough and Buntingford and Stansted Abbots are still lower price compared to some of what we're describing as destination car parks. So the rationale around this was fundamentally looking at some of the differences in parking prices that we've had and trying to streamline some of that by creating these categories where we recognise that there's different purposes for different car parks. So i.e. a destination car park would allow you to potentially access leisure, shopping facilities, potentially theatres, whereas actually your local car parks are probably used less by visitors and more by local people, hence the pricing overall compared to the other car parks is lower. So there's almost a shift in that narrative of it's not so much a change from the historic prices to the new prices, but almost trying to retell the story of we've now revamped and looked at all our car parks, and we feel that this is a sensible proposal in terms of moving forward. That through our consultation, all our respondents were very clear that there is a difference in the different areas in relation to the car park and their purposes and their functions, and therefore pricing needs to reflect that. Granted, some of those prices are higher than what they were previously, but the aim is to try and align as many of those as possible. And then we've got what we describe as our explore car parks, where we're just experimenting with some different ideas because we want some different outcomes. But certainly in terms of the income side, we can take that away. Eric can come back to you.
I've got a couple of hands and I'll bring people out. I just wanted to support Councillor Buckmaster's point about the up to 2 hours at Bell Street, the over 50% increase. That does to me appear anomalous when you look at the range of increases. I'm not asking for an answer on that now, but if that could be looked at as well. Thank you. Councillor Nichols and then Councillor Andrews.
I'd like just to emphasise the important part that the consultation process took in the pricing strategy for car parks, and in particular in Buntingford it was well attended, the in-person one, and the issue of what people worrying about taking away the 90 minutes free parking was hot on people's minds, and I'm thank you for reinstating, because I was dreading opening the report and you rescinding it and having to go back and justify that to people, because we're I don't like to say we're a special case, but we are really, because we don't have any train station or adequate bus service, so the reliance on cars for journeys is much greater, we are a destination town, and that's the only car park, functioning car park in Buntingford, and I'd just like to thank you for keeping the 90 minutes free for now. I'm sure it'll be reviewed in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Less about the charges themselves, more about a bit of clarity. You've got on 117 Kites Lane North and Library Ware. Which is the car park being referred to as library?
I'll defer to Dom if I get this wrong, but my understanding is where the old fire station used to be and where the new.
Okay, well, the library's not there anymore.
No, it's not. No.
It's 183 metres further to the east. So could I suggest you call it Old Fire Station Car Park or Burgage Lane? That way people won't be driving in ever increasing circles around the library looking for somewhere to park.
You're correct, actually. The association with the library, yes. So it's a historical name, and we could look to change it, although we'd need to reprogram sort of the software, which is something I can look into that, certainly.
Okay,
I think people are also familiar with that location as being a car park, so perhaps it's familiar in that sense to visitors.
Yeah, you might also want to consider whether, in fact, we change it. It's considerably smaller than it once was, and it's never been a large car park. And it does tend to fill up very rapidly with people that are now attending the surgery. But I think the library description, it's okay in-house, but I think going forward, that will cause confusion to visitors who will be looking for the library car park, and that could be an issue.
I mean, it's not a surprise that we are down in the weeds very quickly on this, in Appendix D, etc. just remind people, this is a members, this is a strategy document. It'd be great to have some feedback on the strategy as well as the detail. And having said that, Councillor Clements.
I'll try and keep it high level then. Yeah, thanks for bringing this, Tim. I mean, no one likes increasing prices, but I do get where we're coming from there. Though I would echo some of the comments about the details in places, and in general, where we are increasing things, perhaps we can look at sort of staging that over a few years to lessen some of the impacts there. I had kind of two main comments at a sort of strategy level. One is where we are looking at behavioural changes. There were some places where I almost thought we were not surprisingly, given what the document covers, but perhaps relying too much on the pricing rather than alternatives. And I do get there was sort of other things in there, but Northgate End, for example, I know there's been a lot of work being done to improve the car park with the doors and the lighting and all of that kind of thing there. Some of the feedback I've heard from people in Bishop's Stortford is it's a problem that the car park is closed between midnight and 6 a.m. So if you're coming in early, people can't get into it. So people working in town there, that's something that presumably doesn't cost us too much, and we could look at there. I had complaints about the road surface outside the front of the car park there. I appreciate that's not necessarily something directly involved with us, but if we are looking to change people's behaviour, then understanding why people aren't using car parks outside of the pricing, I think is good, and perhaps we could do a little bit more of here. Likewise, talking to people in Hertford, there was talk about encouraging cycling as an alternative route, and can we put more bike places in? That's great. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. The comments I often get when talking to people is that it's not so much where you put your bike once you've cycled into town. It's routes and access into town. It's can be quite difficult. Some of the main roads you're coming into town cycling, and I didn't see anything in the strategy doc talking about working with county council, working part of the LC Whip to really focus on providing alternative routes. And I think that's probably something we could look at more than just where we're putting parking for sort of non-car parking, if you see what I mean. Yeah, so that was my kind of thoughts on the behavioural change. One thing that did concern me a little bit was talking about reviewing the 30 minutes free car parking. I know I find a lot of value in that. I know quite a lot of people get values when you do find yourself having to pop quite quickly into town. You're not going to be there for long, but almost always it's something quite important you have to get to. And I noted that some of the feedback we did get through the consultation was saying that was valuable, and it sounds like in Buntingford it was more so there. So I would be quite disappointed to see that go. I appreciate we're just looking at it, but I think that would be something to seriously consider. Hopefully that was high enough level.
Yeah, thanks. I think the opening hours is a good challenge for Northgate End. We want to make that asset work as hard as it can, and there are some planning constraints at the moment, some planning conditions rather, which constrain the opening hours, which we need to explore. We need to lift the lid on that and see what flexibility we have. The behavioural change is and people in the room have been around a lot longer than I have on this, and it is a very vexed question of how on earth you get anything or anybody or any of us to change our habits. The pricing is very crude, and I really do sense that we need to do something more dramatic, and the LC Whip is an ideal one where you start taking away some of the physical obstacles, but also perhaps some of the attitudinal obstacles. Well, I can't ride in because, and when I get there's nowhere safe to leave my bike. I've got to strap it to a lamppost. So I think there's stuff we can do with secure parking as well. And it's not particularly as part of a parking strategy, but I do think a fresh look at the 20-mile-an-hour zones is also helpful, because it just again, it's one of those rebalancing things. It just tilts the balance a little bit in terms of in favour of pedestrians, whilst not penalising anybody else along the way. So again, it's one of those sort of multi-faceted aspects that we need to look at. Yeah, the 30 minutes free parking is it's a vexed question. It really is. I mean, there'll be numerous papers, research papers, worthy papers proving that it absolutely is essential, or that if you take it away, people spend more time and therefore more money in town. I'm sure there's somewhere in between those that we can land on, but that's subject to the further consultation as part of the strategy. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think reading through this report, thank you very much for all the work that's gone into it. It just, I think, brings out how difficult it is to get that balance between, everyone understands that people don't obviously want to pay any more for their parking, but at the same time, there's all these other, we need cleaner air, we need less pressure, we need to make it fair as well. Is it fair that people who are driving in perhaps pay less than someone who's commuting in on a train or a bus? So, there's a lot of different things to take into account, balancing it all up in the different areas as well. So thank you very much for coming up with such sort of thoughtful proposals. There's just a couple of detailed questions. One was on the one issue. One of the issues that comes up quite regularly for me is the machines which are used for parking, which are often perhaps difficult to use. I think they're aging and they don't necessarily work. And but at the same time, I'm not 100% sure that everyone is ready to do the thing on the app. There are people are still using cards, or I don't think they can use coins anymore. But it's that's a bit of a slow process. I think people are gradually moving over, but I don't think they're there yet. And I'm not sure that, I think we do need to keep maintaining those machines. That's perhaps my point, rather than letting them sort of just stop working so that people have to use the app. And I did have another more detailed question, which was about the old London car park in Hertford, which has got 30 minutes free parking on it. And I just wanted to check, I know there's some arrangement with Simon Ball along, which is linked in with their active travel strategy, so that parents can wait there to pick up their children at the end of the day. 30 minutes isn't always quite enough at the end of the day. And obviously then it goes into long-term parking. So I'd just like some clarification on that, because obviously we want people to be encouraged to not drive up to Simon Ball, which is, very, very tight on the, very bad for air quality, very tight on congestion and everything. So if you could just clarify that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. The machines are far from perfect. I think under the last administration, the opening up of the check-in, check-out was a super thing to do. That's opened up a lot of, taken away a lot of angst about when you're going to leave, so you didn't have to sort of guess how long you're going to be in town. So I think, but we've had feedback that those don't always work, so that produces its own anxiety in a way. It's interesting that the paper after this one tonight is about data inclusion and inclusivity, and making sure we don't exclude people through being, not on top of the technology. And it is a balance, because there are costs to maintain those machines. They are they're expensive to buy, expensive to maintain. However, on the other hand, there are costs to electronic handling of monies, which, in some instances we don't pass on at the moment. We swallow as part of the council. So there's you know, an inherent charge to do with connectivity and messaging and texting, etc., which goes with the service that we buy. So it needs a strategic review across that, and there will be a time when it's more sensible than others to make those changes, I think. But we need to think through how we don't leave people behind in that discussion, I think. Your other point about old London Road, yes, it still is, and it's you know, it's a place where parents can drop their children off and pick them up. My anecdotal lived experience is that very few people do that, judging by the mayhem that ensues each morning outside Simon Ball. So whether there's a chance to, and you know, part of the air quality initiative, which you reviewed action plan previously, was about re-engaging with schools on their active travel plans and making sure that they are, one, substantial and two, implemented. I think there's a tendency to drift from those, and the easier way is to drive. So we need to have a look at that again. But Old London Road, the 30 minutes will remain there as it does elsewhere. It'll be subject to consultation, as it will be elsewhere as well.
Councillor Horner.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you for this paper. I think there are a lot of things when you're looking at a strategic level that I would support, and the objectives around the environment and sustainability, very much support those. I did have a few questions where I don't necessarily see those principles following through to the individual cases and the increases. One that, and I'm thinking parochially, like we've been talking already this evening, but thinking parochially in Bishop Stortford, in particular, the Elm Road car park, which is further from the town centre than I think probably any of the other car parks that we own and we manage, and yet it's been included with Apton Road and Basbow Lane for having the higher long-term rate. I can understand why that will be advantageous for going into Northgate End, but at the same time, if we're looking to prioritise car parks that are further out to reduce congestion, then that doesn't tend to make sense. And furthermore, Elm Road doesn't have any short stay car parking at present, whereas the other two car parks that have had that increase do. And so I can see that increasing that charge in order to encourage short stay works for those two, but it won't work in Elm Road because there isn't any short stay parking. So that was one issue. I also, whilst I would fully support the comments in here about air quality and air quality management areas, there are several car parks that are quite close in Bishop Stortford. The Crown Terrace car park is very close to the Hockrell air quality management area, but that's not referenced anywhere else or looked at in terms. So they are two parochial issues. Perhaps if you can just comment about those in particular. And then my other question might not surprise Dom if I mention about RPZs, and I note that there is a commitment here for a review. So has there been any? That's under short term. What would the timescale for that be? And is the idea behind that to try and to make that an easier process than it is at present?
Okay, so I'll take your inconsistencies there, and yes, I think it would be foolish to argue that they aren't inconsistent. They are inconsistent, and I guess that the overriding ambition within this is to make sure that Northgate End is viable, which it isn't at the moment. It doesn't pay for itself. It's a remarkable asset in terms of its value, and yet as a business case, it's a bit of a disaster. So the more people we can get using that in terms of either short or long term, the better, and that's been underpinning what we've been doing. And yes, it is a crude signal to move people for Elm Road. We do recognise the anomaly, and we'll have another look at that if that's helpful. Crown Terrace, it sits right on top of Hockrell Junction, and you know, forms part of a more strategic car park, in that it's going to be, or has been contractually agreed, that there'll be car parking there for the hotel in Bishop Stortford when it's built. We haven't looked specifically at the impact of that, and it would be an interesting exercise to do, to see, you know, the direct impact of travelling to Crown Terrace, because it serves residential use as well, as you know, in that space. There's precious little area for people to park otherwise, other than in Crown Terrace. But it may be part of something that should spill over into the air quality initiative, and have a look and see what direct impact that has, and then perhaps think about how we can reward different traffic to use it. Just very briefly on RPZs. Yes, it is about trying to make them, it's to challenge the criteria. Since the criteria were set, there hasn't been a single one implemented. So I think the challenge is that because there aren't any future RPZs out there, or is it because the criteria perhaps aren't fit for purpose and need challenging? So the answer is yes, we're trying to open up the ability for RPZs to form part of our on-road parking strategy. I'll leave Dom to describe when that's going to happen.
I can come in. I've got something in my inbox that is a review of the RPZs that I need to look at. So hopefully in the next few weeks, the idea is to have it ready for executive on the 11th of February.
Councillor Williams.
It's going to seem like another minute, but I promise it has a broader implication. It was just that when I was looking at Kibes Lane South, with that, what people would often use that for, it's not just commuter parking, but with also things like, because it sits upon a community asset, which does lots of little classes and things like that. So little bits of free childcare, the local social go there, and all those things are probably going to take more than the half hours free parking it's allowed. But then there's no graduation; it just goes straight to 5 hours, or £6 for 5 hours, whatever. If you compare that to somewhere like, and I could be wrong because I'm not from Bishop Stortford, but Jackson Square, which is primarily a shopping centre, which is retail, that's people, I'm not saying with money, but people who aren't necessarily going to be dependent on the free childcare or the local social. There's a bit of a, equating them financially at 5 hours to me feels a little bit unfair. I think although areas have differing wealth, like Ware may well be more wealthy than Bishop Stortford overall, people who use certain bits in certain areas will be poorer. I just wonder basically if we could have like because I neglected to mention it before, is that car parks that primarily serve those community assets, the sort of low cost things that keep the cultural hubs of towns running, I think they should get some reductions in compared to what would be primarily shopping space. Yeah, it goes just one more, sorry, because East Hart generally owns a lot of those community spaces overall, subsidises them, helps them out. It seems to me there's no point subsidising them and then to damage them by charging them a bit more or equating them with other things.
Okay, thank you. I mean, the jump is because it's a long-term car park with no short-term usage. So I guess as part of the strategy review on car park usage, we should throw that into the mix and make sure that we have that discussion about how can it best serve the people that are there and how it's used. It is sort of binary at the moment. It's 30 minutes or you pay for the full thing. But there should be scope to have a look at that and make sure that we understand how that would, if we were going to flex it, how that could flex.
Councillor Swainson first, please.
Thank you. So we're still not exactly strategy, but reflecting on a couple of points other people have made, I agree with Councillor Horner. I think the Elm Road situation is not ideal, and it is further out, but the main point I think is that it's as Councillor Clements referred to the fact that at Northgate End, the hours are not suitable. I think most of the people who park at Elm Road will be town centre workers who can't use Northgate End. And I think it's useful for them on that basis. I don't know anybody who parks there for other reasons really than working. It's not, as you know, we've already said it's not short term. The other point, just to address Councillor Williams, I think there's maybe a misunderstanding of Jackson Square car park, because although it is attached to the shopping centre, it actually serves the doctor's surgery, lots of facilities like the Methodist Church, where there are lots of social things for people. So I think we need to be careful about that sort of thing. Yeah, no. I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, well, along with the comment with Councillor Horner, we'll note the Elm Road one. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Walkham.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as a person who has struggled to pay for parking at Hertford North car park, I sympathise with Councillor Carter's remarks about the inoperability of these machines. And I do think a simplification of machines. I was in Bath last weekend and they have very simple card payment machines, and there's not anything in the report about how you're planning to replace the machines that are obviously getting to beyond their sell-by dates. In terms of strategy, I'm interested if you even looked at the idea of selling off East Hart's car parks. I'm not at all sure that that's something to be recommended, because obviously they're a great asset for the council. But given that we have these financial problems, I would like to know if a privatisation might bring in new revenue to the council, or whether it would be selling the crown jewels. And finally, on RPZs, in Buntingford, I wonder if there are any plans for introducing RPZs, because some of my constituents are really irritated that parking for the pub at the bottom of our road in Buntingford really makes it impossible for them to keep their cars there. So I do think that resident parking zones would be very useful in Buntingford, while at the same time echoing Councillor Nichols' point about our gratitude for keeping the car park on Bowling Green Lane at prices that are affordable. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah, the machines are, I guess, need to be under review. We do make, and the officers make, sort of tactical decisions, but maybe there is a strategic view to take on machines and how we pay. And I think that overlaps with some of my comments about.
Chairman, I'm struggling to hear.
Sorry, probably missing the microphone, David. Sorry. Yeah, overlaps with some of the comments about, you know, we need to carry people and the inclusion of people and the ability to pay. I do recognise your point about it being easier to pay in some cases than others. I went to St Albans the other day and found myself funneled into a car park, which I had to download an app, but was in a concrete bunker with no Wi-Fi. Had to walk out of town, walk out of the station rather, risk being caught, and then got back, and eventually, having been interviewed twice with both my grandparents, managed to buy a ticket, and yeah, on we went. So we can make it easier. I'm sure we can work at that. Hertford North, not ours, by the way. If so, I can give you an address to complain to if you'd like. I think the notion of selling car parks, I think, varies, and you know, I guess, you know, some of our car parks could have value, inherent value. And some of them, if we sold them, wouldn't generate enough money to pay for the money that's been invested in them. It's not something that forms part of this immediate strategy, but in the long term, it is sensible to review car parking capacity and make sure that we've got enough, not too much, and also the landscape in which we participate, recognising that there are other car parking facilities within towns. RPZs for Buntingford. RPZs are resident driven and are done by request. So the people of Buntingford are equally able to review and apply and work through a process. It's all on the website in terms of how you do it and the mechanism by which currently they are assessed and implemented if they get through that assessment, and recognising that we will be reviewing the criteria for those to make sure that they are still fit for purpose or indeed need changing.
Just before I call in Councillor Nichols, a couple of comments from me. Car park sales, there were a couple of car parks on the original asset list that was considered by the asset reference group, but I don't think either of them are there now. And that's, I think, because it didn't meet the value for money test. On RPZs, all I would say is be careful what you wish for. Councillor Nichols.
Thank you. I'm going to take a much broader view on this and just emphasise some really important things like the urgent need for change on the amount of cars on our roads. There's an astonishing statistic that in 1991 there were 20 million cars on our roads, and now in 2023 there are 40.2 million cars on our roads, and that can't continue. And the impact on that amount of traffic on people is far-reaching, and it affects people's physical and mental health, from air and noise pollution, congestion and associated road danger, and that can't be overlooked. And at the same time, the prosperity of our high streets is dependent on the reduction of traffic and improving accessibility for those travelling by public transport, walking and cycling, because those are the people that spend the money and visit town centres more often. So I'm really encouraged by the approach to the strategy going forward. It's a tailored approach, and it's multifaceted, and it's identifying different mechanisms for finding change and over short, medium and long terms, and it's looking to lobby for policy change. And I'm particularly interested in policy change on 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in Hertfordshire, to see a greater uptake in active travel and the installation of more EV on-street EV chargers. You can't look at car parks in isolation, and pricing has to be part of that strategy, and we do need to take people with us, and it will be a thing that has to happen over time. So I'm very encouraged by what I read.
Thanks for those comments. Yeah, we may, who knows, will we reach peak car? Who knows? I guess it depends on a decision as to whether we've reached peak road, because if we keep building, then no. Just a quick point on EV chargers. Just to recap, this council has currently a contract or a tender out for a minimum of 60 chargers throughout the district on our land. And we've had, I think, half a dozen companies now, serious companies, back in bidding. And that process will work its way through now, through the offices, and make sure that we can pick the one that gives us the best mix of chargers, and also the greatest sort of society value that we can reap out of those bids. But encouraging that there's been a very healthy response. So it's clearly a move. And we might, Eric, move on from the mythical 2 EV chargers in Sawbridge, which were reported within the end of year last year.
Eric, do you want to come back on that?
I was going to make some different points, but that would be good. I think there are some positives, and I was very much in favour of the check-in, check-out when it came, because it's fair. If we can reduce as much as possible, so keeping that system is important, reduce the likelihood of a fine. In terms of the potential for selling car parks or outsourcing, I wouldn't be in favour of that, because I think you make them more commercial, and then they're not necessarily run in the interests of our residents. So the charges could then be higher for a lot more people. So I would say, as a local authority, we should retain control of that. Again, it's really useful listening to all the comments, and because we represent all of the urban and rural areas in the district, so local knowledge is really important. So that's another word for being parochial. I think we just need to be careful about a couple of things. So I think active travel, continue down that route. We've got to look at air quality, sustainable travel, reducing the need to travel. I'm really worried about differential pricing based on emissions, because we have pockets of deprivation around our districts in all of the towns and rural areas. There are people on benefits, low incomes. They're more likely to be the people with 10-year-old diesel cars. So if we go down that route, we're going to be charging them more, and the better off people will be paying less. So that's the wrong kind of taxation, if you put it that way, which is why down the road at the county council, we were very much not in favour of the ultra low emission zone, because of the way that it would impact lower income people. So I would just say be very wary around that. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that, and those are helpful comments. I think that was perhaps the liveliest part of the face-to-face discussions that we had about the differential pricing for emissions. And I think one thing would perhaps I'd recommend that we take away from here is that we start to think more about size of vehicles rather than emissions of vehicles. That being a better correlation to perhaps the ability to pay rather than, so to exaggerate the point, a large SUV, whether it's diesel, petrol or electric, takes up more room, particularly if it's in an RPZ. And perhaps that's something that we should be exploring more actively than necessarily going down the binary diesel electric argument. We'll think that through before we get to the final paper, if that's okay.
Councillor Andrews, then Councillor.
Firstly, can I support Eric's comments around disposing of the car parks? I also feel that we have been well served by them, and so have our residents, and it's vitally important that we keep the current status quo, unless something fairly major changes. Could I just drop in a word of caution around electric charging points? I'm becoming aware of the fact that there are a great many electric charging points out there which are not actually being used. And the reason they're not being used is because the charge is 85 or 90p per kilowatt hour. And people simply don't want to use them and won't use them. And they'll sit empty. So we have to make sure that whichever of the 60 companies have expressed an interest do actually come forward with reasonable rates, which are probably somewhere, depending on how super duper their charging points are, probably somewhere in the 45 to 65 bracket. Interesting to see the new super hub that's opened in Stevenage. I don't know what their prices are. Slap bang next to the motorway. I guess they're up here in the 80 to 90p, but they are empty. You know, it's a distress purchase. Your exhaust is hanging off. You go buy an exhaust. You're coming up the A1 and you're running on giga nothings. You've got to go and buy it. But there's an awful lot round me that are just sitting there, and the leaves build up, and they sit there and do nothing. What was that point that was just mentioned? It slipped my mind. What we took, the last thing we were talking about? Size. Size. Thank you. I'm glad somebody else said it. In RPZs, yes, I could see that would be practical, because you could, from the VIN or from the V5, you could easily determine and charge a rate on that basis. But in car parks, and I kind of got the feeling when we were going through, reading through the consultation, that there had been a suggestion, or it was the thinking was there to possibly charging car parks on the basis of size. And I don't think, if that was the case, I don't think that's going to prove at all practical. A civil enforcement officer has got a tough enough job as it is at the moment, standing at the side of the road arguing whether or not this is 6 inches longer or 5 inches wider, or it weighs 200 kilos less, is not really something that they should be doing. And possibly even we should be thinking about automating a lot of the work that the CEOs do, because we do put them in some fairly difficult positions sometimes.
Did you want to come back on that?
I will, just on the, and I agree wholeheartedly about the emerging recharge, that there is a great deal of gouging going on in the recharge market. And I guess the only way of potentially resolving that is that you create more in the market, you create more spaces, more ability to compete, so that, and it's not new. I mean, driving down a motorway, the service station coming up was branded as a Shell or BP, or, you know, and there was very little choice. You either went in or you didn't fill up. And the same is true now, but there is more scope, I fancy, within delivering of electrons and not petrol tankers for that to be a more competitive space. I too would be interested to see how grid fare at the Nebworth turn-off, yeah.
Got lots of hands. Councillor McAndrew.
Thank you. On the emissions, I'm not sure. Current government thinking is on weight of vehicle. So you might have to sort of read up on that. And they've got a sort of matrix that there are different weights, how much it would cost to road traffic licence, etc. So there's one there. Now, when I joined this council, Pontingford was a hamlet. And I've listened to all the schools of thoughts and arguments and about this car park in Pontingford, and we haven't moved on. It's a town parish now, and it's got major developments round about it. My question is, why isn't it being treated differently? Why are they getting the first hour and a half? And now I appreciate what Councillor Sue Nichols has said, but it's times have moved on, and I think all car parks have got to move on with that. In the report, you mentioned that households have got one vehicle, X amount of households have got one vehicle per household, then 14% have got 2, 3, 4, or whatever. The actual figure from the County Council Transport report is the average vehicle ownership in the East Hants District Council is 1.35 per household, which is quite considerable. I think I've mentioned that before to Tim. It's good to see that you've mentioned the figures in the railway car parks in the document. Now, what's actually happening, the reality is that prior to COVID, the railway train usage at Bishop Stortford was 3.1 million. At the end of March this year, it was currently 2.8 million, but Greater Anglia have assured me that they are back to pre-COVID and above figures for the railway station, commuters, etc. Well, commuters, holiday makers, etc. Stansted Airport's far exceeding pre-COVID at this time and moment, and obviously there's 12 carriages on. Now, has consideration been taken into the rural areas coming into the railway station to commute into London, Cambridge, etc.? In 2007, there was 8. I'm going to go on to air quality around about Hockrell here, Tim. There was 8,000 students in Bishop Stortford going to schools. Currently, that's when the air quality come in. Currently, there's over 10,000, and that's an increase of 25%. And we all know that they don't want, they get dropped off, etc., etc. Now, one of the other things, sort of, Uttersfield, they don't have a district plan, and round about East Hearts, they've got all this housing developments, etc., moving on, and they got planning permission for 35 million, I think it was. But now they're looking at 49 to 51 million passengers per annum. We're going to have the hotel in Bishop Stortford, which will generate some. I know the bits and pieces about that. So with all that sort of consideration, how does that sort of, what you do, have you future-proofed is what I'm saying for the vehicles? And the other thing is that the Bishop Stortford's looking at phased pedestrianisation, and the car parks will be used differently within that phased pedestrianisation. Has these factors been taken into consideration? I'm not saying this in a negative, I'm trying to extract.
Wow, there's a lot going on there.
There's more to come.
Let's start off at 10. Let's see if I can get on to the other questions. Yeah, how do we know that we've future-proofed it? Well, we absolutely don't know whether we've future-proofed it. We know that the general observed experience, looking at Northgate End, we've got 2 floors, stroke 3 floors empty. There must be more capacity than is needed currently within Bishop Stortford. Very crude, but that's the sort of conclusion you can draw. Lots of things are going to happen in Bishop Stortford. We know Old River Lane's going to happen, and that was part of the thinking behind Northgate End. So I think we need to let some of these things evolve and mature before we can start making more informed decisions, or in order to be able to make more informed decisions about how well we've matched supply and demand. I think that's about all I can say, Graham, on that one. I mean, the Stansted Airport expansion is, you know, it will impact Bishop Stortford on so many ways, not least of which attracting workers away from a town centre, which we, you know, you've lived through that experience umpteen times over already. You know, that's out with our gift, I'm afraid.
Yeah. On the EV charging side of things, Northgate End's got 50 EV chargers. It used to be an average of 8 per day. I don't know if that figure's gone up or not, Tim, but not a criticism, but if I'm driving through Bishop Stortford, I don't know there's EV chargers in Northgate End. It would be good if there was something in the front of the building, a big sort of EV charger. I don't know if it can be put in signs, but I do know when you go into other towns, you do see the car parks with EV sort of charging them. And the EV vehicles are increasing in number quite rapidly. But could Northgate End not be the car park to go to for EV charging? And you can say the first 2 hours car parking's free, but it's only a 7.5 kilowatt per hour charger. The cars, I believe, are there sort of 6-7 hours during the day, 8 hours. Could sort of a charger matrix be done to encourage people to use that car park? It's just another piece of the jigsaw.
Yes, I think it could. I think we're then treading a very thin line between, you know, people who can afford the most expensive cars on the road at the moment, getting further privileges by having no road tax and reduced car parking fees, which I think can rub the wrong way. You mentioned weight in your first comments, and you know, at some stage, my electric car, I will start paying road tax on. Quite rightly, I should pay road tax. I run up and down the road, my wheels wear out the road. I make use of all the facilities on that road, so it's quite right that I should. So I think car parking has to be level as well for my money. The fact that you've chosen to have a different sort of driving force within your car, I don't think you should at this stage necessarily be rewarded or penalised for. I think it's something that we need to be keep an eye on. I don't know, and I haven't had a chance to look since you raised the question, but I'm wondering whether our charger is actually on ZapMap, which is the comprehensive mapping of all EV chargers. And certainly that's how I get alerted to where charges are. So
not everybody's aware of SatMap, and when you look at SatMap, you think there's just one there until you actually click on
yeah,
it.
it will.
Those-
Yeah, I'll expand out into, but yeah, and part of the EV charger that we've got at the moment, that's one of the destinations where we could see some further installations. It's open to them to come back with commercial proposals.
So picking up on Rachel's point earlier about the machines, paying, etc. Moving forward, we've got to understand the life of these machines. It's probably only a few years, and they will then have to be replaced, because I think what you're doing is you're seeing out the life of these machines. I would prefer they were made redundant and whatever, but whatever challenging matrix you'll have in the car park, you would obviously need modern machines or ER, whatever it is. And I'm just wondering how this is future-proof and what your sort of plan of attack is. Is it next year, the year after? Is there equipment out there to do maybe what the different scenarios that you're looking at?
Yeah.
So you'll be aware that at Northgate End we made a conscious decision to only have 2 pay and display machines, and the rest of the car park is pay by phone, or obviously you go downstairs and you use the. So that was our sort of first test and experiment. We know the machines are still very popular. So in terms of you'll see one of the actions is that we need to look at what that replacement scheme looks like from an asset perspective. In line with that, if we do consider the removal of paper, that could lead us to the removal of 30 minutes. So there's a whole host of things that need to be looked at, but immediately we don't have a plan of action. So we know we're about 7 years in terms of the life of those machines. They've probably got about 10 to 15 years in them. So at the moment, if they are out of action, we will do what we need to get them back in play. So there's no strategic move around what the future looks like at the moment. But as part of this strategy, certainly we need to explore. So at the moment, our CEOs use their digital screens to check. So the actual paper element of a pay and display ticket isn't necessarily necessary apart from your proof of your free 30 minutes. So there's a couple of things to play with as part of this strategy. So like I said, at the moment, we will replace and fix, and we know they're not ideal at the moment. And there is an action to do a sampling of all the machines to make sure they can be used as optimally as possible.
Yeah, quite a lot there to look at. Yeah. This is a matter of interest. The number of vehicles parking, are they increasing?
Bit too quick, yes. It's not huge. I mean, it's something like between 500 and 700 per month. We're getting more in, but it's in the right direction. But there does need to be, a charm offensive, one of which we've, we're working through automatic doors, we're working through better lighting, we're working through, something as interesting as a local art display within the foyer, and also, some pick up and drop off lockers in there. So the belief is that the asset could do more, and also the more it's used, the less it becomes strange, the more it will become part of the norm. And I guess at some stage, the Millennium Dome wasn't everybody's favourite, and now, people quite like walking over it.
So the increases, that's CPI, is it CPI plus that you're looking at? Just CPI, but no.
So the entire modelling around the pricing is based on some of the principles in the strategy. So all the car parks have been recategorised. The specific modelling looks at what we describe as a linear increase, so trying to simplify every hour. So in most car parks, what we describe as destination car parks, they would go up by £1.20, £1.20. Yeah, so it's not what it was previously. Hence, having this brought with the strategy is that it's deviating from what was approved previously in response to the 1.75 million income target that council agreed in February last year.
I saw several additional hands at the beginning of Councillor McAndrew's contribution. I'm not sure who came first. I'll take Councillor Nichols and then Councillor Boylan.
Councillor Andrews was referring to Buntingford and the rapidly growing population, and I'm very interested in the idea of car sharing and pooling as an option for Buntingford. We don't have public transport or in train on bus services that would attract people away from car journeys. So, and I'm interested to see that it's a long-term goal, ambition in the strategy. Can I put the case for it being in a medium-term goal, even on a trial basis? Because I think there would be a potential for good uptake of that for local and more broader journeys across the district, and it could really have a positive impact on reducing the amount of journeys in peak times on our roads. And I'd like you to perhaps take that up as a suggestion.
Yeah, we'll do. I'll happily shift that in the priorities. Well, sorry, in delivery timescales rather than priorities. There are a number of examples where it's worked and it's worked well. There's one particular one in Calderdale, in Todmorden, where there is an active scheme where car sharing, is something. It's something that, and it's nothing about hair shirt or being environmentally sustainable. Just the raw economics of it. You don't have to pay your insurance. You don't have to pay car tax separate. You share it. An asset which previously sat around not doing anything for 90% suddenly starts working in more of its time. So it makes a lot of sense all ways around. I think in fairness, the council would be very much in the facilitator and sort of influencing rather than direct application. But it's something we'll happily pursue.
Councillor Boylan and then Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to go back to the issue about size. And it's just about a caution around the whole concept of charging regarding the size of the vehicle. This is not because I drive an SUV. We've already heard about those that are less able to pay potentially being penalised in some of these car parks. In terms of vehicles, size does not always equate to wealth. Lots of tradesmen and women drive vans of various sizes to do their work. In terms of size, they can be compared with SUVs, and often they're bigger than SUVs. So how would we differentiate? It starts becoming really complex. There's already evidence of tradesmen being unwilling to travel into London boroughs to work due to both the ULEZ and high parking fees. So if we were to go down that route, we need to go in with our eyes wide open and the potential impact that could have.
No, that cautionary advice is well founded. I think it's something that we should explore. I think we'd be duty bound to explore. But yes, eyes wide open, I think.
Yeah. Councillor Carter, Councillor Williams, and then I'd like to move on if we may, but let's see what comes next.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'd just like to begin by just supporting what Councillor Nichols has said about the numbers of cars and how they're increasing, and that really is something that we are going to have to manage and try and reduce demand for cars. Obviously, there are some people who do have to drive. And I'm interested in this proposal. It's not a proposal, it's to continue to promote the discounted spaces for carers. And I just wonder if you could say a bit more about that. Is that family carers or employed carers? I mean, obviously both types of carers. Employed carers may have very little choice about where they park and very little time to actually find a parking space. So I'd just be interested to find out more about what that involves. And the other question was about car clubs. That again, this is a way of people, in London, car clubs are much more widely used than here. There are people, I've got friends who will say, you know, I'd really like not to have a car. It just takes up a lot of space and thinking space and physical space, and I don't want one, but I would like to be able to use one occasionally. But car clubs, they're difficult to find. So I wonder how that's going to be developed. I think we may have one, because obviously car clubs, they need spaces to park, and you've got to allocate spaces so you can always drop off the cars there, or you have to have some kind of system. But I'd just be interested to know a bit more about how that might work in practice.
I'll ask Dom to get his thinking head on, come back about the carers and how that works, that systems works. Just while he's thinking, on car clubs, I think there's a whole spectrum, I think, of, and maybe you're thinking in London about the zip cars where you go onto a website, you log your requirements, and then you find it tells you exactly where the car is. You go along with your card, and then you get, and off you go, and you drop it around accordingly. And there's that, and that requires an amount of capital for people to be able to invest and see the commercial benefit, and to release that and manage it for their clients. There's something a lot more, a lot less formal, in that neighbours can share a car. I live on a close with 12 houses, and believe it or not, there are going on for about 30 cars there, with children who still live at home, etc. And there's an active discussion about how we could do something about that. Could we share cars? Could we engineer it such that we can actually share the cost of running those cars? And I think there's, in that spectrum, there's probably quite a lot of different variants that we could explore. And it's one of those, I think, where we can, very much like the energy hubs, we can act as a sort of information source and promoting things and prompting things, rather than actually delivering on that basis, if that helps.
Ms. Williams. So in the context of the carers permits, I think that relates to the resident permit zones, in the context of commercial organisations paying for a permit which gives them rights for their workers to actually visit and residents within the zone. So that's my understanding, in terms of there's a very low value that's paid currently by those organisations, and that will continue. And I think that's sort of the essence of what's being proposed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Williams.
I just want to sort of follow on the size-based pricing, and say that, as a man who drives both a smart car and has spent inordinate, far too much time driving around in vans, that I think it's a really worthwhile idea. I never, in my working life, have felt like I've been impeded, because you park at Tesco's. You're going for lunch, you go to Tesco's, you grab a meal deal, you sit there for like half an hour, eat it, and move on to your job at a property or a warehouse. I think the majority of the time, size-based charging wouldn't impact van drivers, but it would allow people with smaller cars, young couples who drive smart cars, to go to more places and to enjoy our community. And then there's the other side, is that larger vehicles cause more damage. They're heavier, they cause more wear and tear when they're braking. I'm going to assume, due to the weight of them, they need to brake with more force, causing more particles from the tyre to head out into the air. I think it's perfectly fair to charge larger vehicles more and smaller vehicles less. And then there's also the fairness factor in car parking spaces. Big vehicles take up more space, they make getting out more awkward. And we're not penalising disabled people in their vans or whatever, because they have their blue badge and they can park for free. There's a disingenuous to the argument about size, that it's against working people or disabled people. It's not. It's about fairness and equality of the space we use and the damage we do to what's around us.
Thank you. I'm conscious of the time. We've had an hour and 20 minutes on this. and we are getting into a bit of debate about size, but one last go on it.
Thanks. So it just occurred to me as the mention of blue badges, and I had meant to mention this earlier. I think one of the proposals is to charge for blue badges in our car park. However, car parks, sorry. However, parking on the street presumably would still be free. So I'm just not sure how that would work out. So they could park in the high street outside a car park and not pay anything. So what's the deal there?
Yeah, I mean, this is a further consultation about whether we should charge for blue badges in our car parks. So it's not part of the immediate changes, but it's part of a longer term change that we should ask the question of. Recognise the anomaly of on street and off street, yeah. And outside of RPZs, we administer charging. We administer parking on roads and keep the traffic regulation orders that are in place. We invariably have less control over what goes on. But I think it's part of a wider consultation and a difficult question. And I know it's been asked before. It's one that we need to think through again.
Councillor Andrews.
Yeah, just support that point. I mean, not everybody will be aware necessarily, but blue badge holders can park on double yellow lines for up to 3 hours. So what happens effectively is displacement. So if they're being displaced, why don't you remove the disabled parking bays and use them as ordinary parking bays and extract the money? Because people with a disabled badge can take advantage of, providing they're not causing an obstruction, parking on double yellow lines.
Councillor McAndrew.
Councillor Andrews put my point across eloquently about the length of time a blue badge can
In which case, we'll move on. Thank you. Any final comments before we put this to the vote? No?
Just obviously that size does matter.
Thank you. So the recommendations for the committee is A, to consider and provide comments on the parking strategy, which I think we've done fairly exhaustively, and B, to comment on the proposed changes effective from April 2025 for consideration by the executive as described in paragraph 2 proposals. I can have a proposer for those two recommendations, please. Councillor Nichols, the seconder. Thank you. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. That's carried. Just to re-emphasise thanks to Councillor Hoskins and officers for their very exhaustive report on that issue. Our next item is digital exclusion. I'd like to thank Councillor Dumont and officers for their patience in waiting for us to get to this item. Councillor Dumont.
Thank you. That certainly was a long debate, the longest I've witnessed. So I'm quite pleased to introduce this important item around digital exclusion, because I think that it is important that as the way we work changes and as technology changes and the way things are done change, that organisations such as this council do reflect and make sure that the changes are being made in the right way, and that we do not just drift into the future, but we're in control of what we do. In terms of our digital transformation, the council has made significant strides, notwithstanding that there is more to be done and that the council continually needs to innovate and improve. Members will see that it's reflected in this paper that those who do access our services in person are often the ones with the most complex needs. But currently they represent about 2 to 3% of our interactions with customer services. 2 to 3% are face-to-face. And our approach to the provision that we provide will continue to be driven by data to ensure that we are meeting the needs of our residents. It's worth noting that approximately 80% of the face-to-face contacts that the council has are related to tax and benefits, council tax and benefits. And this is a quite significant increase from around 50% just in the spring of 2023, when service contacts were more evenly spread across various departments and service areas. To address digital exclusion, which is one of the questions I think that this committee asks, we have kept our receptions open for walk-ins. Residents can also book appointments if they find that convenient. And in line with our objective of being a listening council, we've held consultations in public spaces, face-to-face, like the ORL Public Square, and the in-person workshops that we had for our parking strategy. And this was a clear shift from previous administration, which only held its consultations online, and it is part of our commitment to being a listening council. Our face-to-face services, we have them in Hertford, which are available on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and also in Bishop Stortford when they're available on Wednesdays and Fridays. These were reopened, and there was a phased reopening after the COVID lockdown. And the hours and the timings that we've got are based on data and resident demand. And face-to-face, while face-to-face demand continues to decrease, as you'll see in the data, we continue to provide access for those that need it. We do acknowledge that in terms of are all of our services working as well as they could do online, we acknowledge that for a small number of residents, the online system for residents' parking zones permits may not be ideal. The technology we have in place doesn't offer the flexibility that some residents would prefer. However, unlike other councils, we do continue to provide paper permits for residents that actually visit our offices. We also recognise similar challenges with bulk waste collections, and that hopefully will be addressed in the fullness of time. As a council, we are looking to learn from best practice, and digital exclusion is not something that is unique to local authorities, and we recognise that other forward-thinking councils are partnering with businesses and agencies to address any concerns. We will continue to learn from their experiences where possible. Our commitment to inclusivity remains at the core of our approach to digital exclusion, and we will ensure that all residents who choose not to use our digital services, or those that are unable to, are fully supported, and that this work will be ongoing. So I'm happy to take any questions, but where by nature of this being lots of operational aspects, I may also defer to my colleagues as well.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carter and Councillor Clements.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, thank you for that report. And I think we can see that people are moving more towards use of digital resources. What the sort of anecdotal, there is some anecdotal evidence to suggest that residents who aren't able to use digital services are using other agencies such as Citizens Advice, or, for example, in Hertford, when we have a theatre which is, you know, all the tickets are bought digitally, but people will go across the road to the Tourist Information Centre to find out more about how it, you know, they can't actually buy a ticket there, but they can find out more about what, you know, how it all works. Similarly, the town council has a reception which is staffed, you know, every day, and people on the phone, obviously, and quite a lot of the queries coming through are for other councils, for East Herts and county council. So I wonder how much we're working with other organisations to make sure that everyone can access the services that they need, they can be properly signposted and so on.
Councillor, before you come back on that, what I'd like to try as an experiment, if we take a number of contributions from us and come back collectively, is that okay? Yeah, it's Councillor Clements.
Yeah, thank you for the report and putting it all together. I want to kind of say I was really pleased at the end, Joe, that you're talking about how important it is that we do maintain for people that can't use the digital services, that we have that face-to-face contact where we are still trying to move as much as we can to digital. I had two questions really. One around the telephony users. I saw it was at Granicus. I've forgotten what the new system is, but that sounds fantastic. Great, more data and understanding is brilliant. But do we understand why people are choosing to phone rather than go online? I don't know if it's like the millennial in me, but I will always defer to going online, and it tends to be okay. I have to phone up. Okay, I have to phone up because I can't do something online. I wonder, do we have an understanding at the moment of why people are still choosing to phone up when they have the choice of two? I think it was 2/3 are still phoning. And could we use that to improve our digital offering? The second question I had, and Joe, you touched on it as well. We've had a change in the needs of people who are still coming in face to face, and particularly, I think you were saying even in the last kind of couple of years, that's the type of people coming in and the needs they have. That percentage has changed. Have we had to do anything, or should we be doing anything in terms of, I don't know, training for reception staff to take account of that change? If there are more complex needs coming in, is that face-to-face still something that's working quite well, or are there new challenges that we're having there that we should be thinking about? So yeah, just those two. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. Yeah. So thank you for those questions. So in terms, Councillor Carter, make sure I'm answering the right question. You're talking about people accessing different agencies, different authorities, and how can we make sure they're signposted to the right authority? Is that...
So yes, I'm saying that people access, anecdotal evidence suggests that people are accessing the council services, not using the council's interface themselves, but by trying to go to other agencies such as Citizens Advice, where they'll have somebody who kind of maybe advocates for them, works with them, does the application online for them, whatever it is. Or they will, if they're looking for information which they can't find online, they can't access it online, they'll go into the Tourist Information Office or the or another kind of official council offices where they can get that information. So my question is, do you make an effort to go out to other agencies which are kind of working with people as either advocates or just information providers to help them or to inform them, I guess?
Okay, good question. I'll pass part of that to Ben in terms of what he's doing, reaching out to other agencies. But some of the stuff you said, we offer those services as well. So we're not in the town centre, we're here. But when residents do come in, they can book an appointment. What's the service called, Alex? They can come in and an assisted visit or assisted self-service. So people can come in if they're having trouble with filling out forms online, etc. They can come in, sit with a customer service officer and have access to exactly that kind of service. In terms of what you've said about the different authorities and people not knowing where to go, yeah, that's been a long-term ongoing problem ever since I've been a member of not knowing exactly what authority, or residents not knowing, is it a highways issue, is it East Herts, is it county, is it parish? That's quite a big problem to solve that may well be solved itself by some forthcoming changes that are coming down the line. But no, I don't have an answer to that particular problem at the moment. But what I would say is our found officers here are very quick to highlight if it's not something that we deal with and provide the residents with the right information, the agency they need to go to. But Ben, if I can hand to you about interacting with those other agencies.
Yeah, so you're right about the Citizens Advice. We have kind of regular dialogue with them, just kind of sharing information about kind of any patterns or trends. So for example, in March when the council tax letters go out, Often people don't understand some of the nature of the increases and the changes, particularly if it's affecting their benefit. So we see a spike in people coming into reception asking questions. I know that Systems Advice also see a spike in people coming to them. So we try and kind of share information that way. That's kind of one example. In the past, we have undertaken attempts to kind of do a bit more closer collaboration with some of our partners. We did it particularly in Bishop Stortford, where the reception was based in the library there for a good year or so, on the basis that being based within a sort of county council organisation or building, and having some of those kind of shared front offices might actually lead to a bit more kind of sharing of information. It didn't kind of work out in that way, which is a bit of a shame, which is why we're now into the Jackson Square shopping centre. And it wasn't that there was any kind of unwillingness to do it. It was just that we were in a meeting room at the back of the building, and it didn't quite work in terms of the setup. We had to be out of there by 2 o'clock to allow for other sort of people to come in. So we never really got a chance to do some of that collaboration. I think the changes that are coming down the line, which Councillor Demont's referring to, may kind of force us into that, a bit more of that collaboration. So I think probably the answer to the question is there a kind of structured way in which we're sharing information and talking about the different trends in customer behaviour between the organisations? No, I think we probably do it with Systems Advice and a bit more ad hoc with some of the other organisations. I'll pick up just some of the other questions as well, if you want to come back to Councillor. Just on the phones, yeah, it's a really good question. For as long as I've been here, which is 9 years now, people just seem to like to phone us. And I think that's always been the case, and it will continue to be the case. It might be to do with the geographic spread of the district, in that we've got quite a wide geographic area, and then only 2 reception centres in Hertford and Stortford, and therefore kind of phoning us is a natural response. I think the direction of travel, as you noted there, an increase in digital over telephony, but for some reason it still seems to be quite persistent that people will quite happily stay on the phone, even if there's a kind of 20-minute delay. They will stay there to get hold of us. One of the things we have been discussing is the telephony service so good that people get an instant response there and then, and that's why they keep phoning? And should we switch it off to discourage people to go digital, which I don't think is the right way to do it. But there is something about possibly the quality of the service being provided just being so much better on the telephone. And there's some points in the paper towards the end there which talks about how we improve the digital offer. So I think in terms of the actual customer behaviours, I'm not quite sure why that is the case. I think the challenge for us is to actually improve the digital offer. And then on the last point around the kind of face-to-face training, it's a really good point. We did do some work with staff a while ago on kind of mental health awareness, as well as the kind of safeguarding side of things, just to make sure staff are aware of some of those challenges coming in. They're not, however, kind of mental health experts or advocates, but I think that is something worth exploring. After COVID as well, we did have to do kind of personal safety training because there was a bit of a spike in aggression towards public sector workers. Fortunately, we didn't have any serious incidents, just got 1 or 2 people getting quite agitated. So I think there are a number of challenges that customer services staff need to think about. I think the safety is one of them. I think the supporting people with more complex needs, particularly around mental health, is probably something else that we're considering.
I'd just like to add that where we're providing good customer service, that's certainly something we want to encourage and to be proud of.
Councillor Marlowe.
Yeah, we're talking about digital exclusion here. I just wondered how you're responding to what I find is a problem, particularly amongst older people who can't afford broadband, etc., and are using mobiles. There's big strips of our area that are simply not communicable with, e.g. down the Haddams and into Hunsdon is a nightmare. If we've got district nurses coming in from the NHS wanting to write reports using their mobile communications, they can't because it's simply no signal there. So are we working with the providers to deal with some of that? And I suspect that's probably happening elsewhere in our area because we're so rural.
I understand we've got one of the highest uptakes of digital usage in the country. You gave me the numbers earlier, so I'm not 100% sure how big the problem is, but perhaps hand over to Ben with a technical question.
Yeah, I'll just introduce my colleagues as well in case he does come on. We've got Alex Cook from Customer Services, who's the manager there, and he may be able to provide some insight, and also Adam, who works in our transformation team. So we brought them both along for because they're quite critical to this. I think in terms of the digital exclusion in a wider sense, yes, there are patches of the district which are not covered by broadband because it's so expensive, even for the sort of gigaclears of this world to get out there and install the fibre to the cable, and also mobile coverage is relatively poor, as you're saying. So that has been a challenge. I think the county council has a connecting counties, it was called Connecting Counties programme for a while, rolling out broadband, which has been quite successful. I think that has delivered broadband to lots of different villages in the district, which is great. The other thing that we're involved in is a partnership called the Digital Innovation Zone, which is a kind of collaboration between the public sector, the private sector, and some of the some voluntary bodies and the NHS and others to talk about how we lobby central government for more investment, particularly in mobile infrastructure, and also work with some of the private sector companies on convincing them to come here and build more masts and so forth. So that's something that we're doing through that group. I think probably on our own in isolation, we don't have much of an impact. So I say the Digital Innovation Zone is probably the way we're trying to achieve that, but it is a challenge for some of those operators that don't see it as particularly profitable. And I think some of the areas you're referring to there are kind of in that category.
Thank you. I feel weird saying this when you're sat behind me, but just what you talked about assisted self-service, does that mean that there are actually terminals available for people to come in and use to make digital applications of one sort or another?
The person that does this?
Yeah, so both of our sites, Bishopsthorpe and Hertford, have self-service PCs available to members of the public during our opening hours. And one of the tasks we do ask our customer service advisors to do is help people who need it on those if they are carrying out self-service for whatever query it may be.
Right. You put your microphone on, please. You mentioned we're in control of what we do in your opening speech. I'm just wondering how much control we have actually got. Because our IT, we share it with Stevenage. And I'm just wondering, does that relationship with Stevenage hamper our progress in this sort of area? And recently there's a survey come out, Jen said, a quarter of 18 to 34 people never answer the phone, and what they do is they text rather than respond. They text to respond to a telephone call rather than using the telephone because they don't like speaking into the telephone. So there's different groups of people that we've got to cater for. There's those that don't want to speak into the telephone and they need the digital. When we were doing the West contract a couple of years back, prior to Tim looking at it, I wanted every single form on the West contract to be digitalised, and I only was successful in getting about 65. I'm not quite sure what the figure was, and there was seemingly a few hundred or whatever. And at that time, I wasn't too pleased that we didn't go sort of digital with it moving forward with the new contract. We did use scan on the waste bins, which is a good sort of step forward. So one of the questions is, does Stevenage hamper our progress with the nature of the contract and the way it works? The waste contract, has it gone fully digital or has it not gone digital? And when we speak about the general public making contact with the council, what we were trying to get to was, well, take for example the waste contract. A customer, we wanted them to go online and go directly to the waste contract and they could deal with a missed bin, yeah? my understanding, the end version is that the customer contacts these farms, whether it's telephone or digital, and these farms then send it off in a different route to, I think I'm getting nods of agreement here, to the waste contract. And how we sort of monitor our telephone calls, etc., is different from the sort of waste contract I'm sort of led to believe, and there's that sort of thing. But on the digital, have we made progress to going directly to operations, grass cutting, hedgerows, etc., etc.? Planning's mentioned in the document, and I mean, yeah, it's digitalised, but that's generic throughout the sort of country. You go into Whittlesod or whatever, it's the same sort of software that's there. And being in control of what we do, I don't think we're actually fully in control of what we do, because we've just had Ben explain about we're basically in the hands of the Virgins, the Sky, the GigaClears, BT connections, etc., to install broadband. Even in Bishopstorp, but they don't have full coverage in broadband. You know, it's a complete and utter disgrace. So yeah, I'll leave it there for the moment.
I agree with you. We don't have full control, and that's not what I meant. What I was really trying to do is sort of say it's good that this item has come to this committee. That's the point I was trying to make, and it's something I used to make in the HR committee when we had COVID and we had hybrid working, and we shouldn't just drift into that without checks and balances and at least having a conversation about it. And that's what I meant. We should be as in control as we possibly can be and keep having the conversation. Quite a lot of questions there. So I think you asked about, does the contract we have with Stevenage, does that hamper digital innovation? I don't see any reason it does. No. It's going to be around specific platforms and specific technology that we need to deliver a specific service. I don't see why that contract would hamper it. In fact, I think there is now more money and there are more developers, and I would see that it would actually improve that situation. So, and I think that we'd need to speak or need to get the opinion of Matt Canterford as to where there might have been things that have held up, but I don't believe that's the case, unless you have a specific example.
I believe there are challenges, and I'll leave it there. I believe there are some challenges.
Just to say, I think in terms of the question, does that relationship with Stevenage and the loss of sovereignty impact what we're doing? Probably not, because when you look at what Stevenage do, and you take out their housing stock, guess what? They've got all the same challenges we have in terms of digital exclusion, and their transformation agenda looks very similar to ours in terms of the strategy and the objective. You take off Stevenage and just put East Hearts, and they're more or less the same. In fact, they also use Granicus, and we meet with them fairly regularly to go over some of the challenges. So I think in this particular instance, it hasn't hampered us. I think wider challenges you're referring to may still be valid, but on this particular issue, no, we're both organisations are heading the same direction.
Yeah, and I speak as chairman of the Joint IT Committee. You know, I think everything that agreement comes in front of that committee. I've been there for a few years now. I've never seen a member outside of that committee attend and scrutinise anything we're doing there. So I really would welcome that if people have those kind of concerns. To address that, it's interesting you were sort of talking about the way people communicate these days, and you might get a phone call and ignore that. What did you want? In fact, Helen, when she did our staff briefings not long before Christmas, one of the requests she made to all staff in the briefings was, please don't email people, just try it, pick up the phone next time you need to communicate with someone, have a phone call. But yeah, I get it with my kids. I ring my son and he texts back, what do you want? And I've picked the phone up, you'd know, wouldn't you?
You're not allowed to get a response.
Yeah, at least I get a response. And then there were some questions around within the waste contract, which I'm not quite qualified to answer.
Yeah, Adam can talk a bit more in detail about this, Graham. Maybe we can take some of it offline because some of it's quite technical. But I think in terms of what do people contact us for with regards to waste, it's usually my bin was missed. or can I request a new bin? Those are the two major ones. There's some other ones around assisted collection and bulky goods, but those are the two main ones, both of which are fully automated in terms of the request goes straight through to the contractor and it's all digital. We've got a big mobilisation project going on at the moment, which Adam's involved in. Adam's happy to talk to you about that in more detail. Might do it outside of the meeting. I think might be a level of detail which is too much. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Chair.
Any more comments or questions for the digital exclusion paper? Okay.
Can I just make a...
Calvin, of course. Sorry.
Thank you. I think that what's come up in a number of comments is the need to improve, and I think it was mentioned by Ben maybe, the need to improve the digital services. I think it's in the report that you need to bring those all the different aspects of that together so that it's much easier to use. So that would be my comment, that's something that perhaps we should be recommending. Perhaps it is very important. I think the other concern that I have obviously is to make sure that those assisted self-service appointments continue, so that when we're looking at budgetary constraints in the future, that we continue with that and we continue with having open receptions in both of our main towns, that those users who need to use them can continue to use. So they would be my main two comments, Chair.
Thank you. I just want to be sort of really clear on that point. In my role when I've been speaking to officers, we have to provide those services for the people that need them. I've asked questions, have we had complaints? Have we had, how many concerns have we had raised about someone who needed to access us and couldn't? I don't think there's any data of people in that category at all. So it does need to be data driven as well. But it's really interesting to hear what you're saying, Councillor Carter, about people going to other services because they can't access or didn't know. Maybe there's something there that needs a further conversation and some more thought as well, perhaps.
Yeah, I hope I can remember the point I was about to make. Oh yes, it was about improving the services. So I think I'd just like to know how you would work out how to improve them. So obviously these are they're services which are used by a range of the public, all sorts of members of the public. So are you going to survey the users to find out what they find difficult and what they find a problem? Because I think that's, technical experts have all sorts of, ideas about what's helpful, but that's not necessarily, they don't necessarily see the barriers that users see. So I think I think it's really important to get the user experience in order to build on that in order to improve them. I mean, I think everybody's had that experience of trying to do something online and getting into some loop with some chatbot, and it can't answer your question. It just sends you around in a loop, and then you can't phone somebody up. So it's that sort of thing, or else you've got to fill in a form, but you don't know how long the form is and what the questions are until you get to them. So, it's all of those sorts of things where you really need that user experience to find out what problems are. So just wondering how you're going to feed that in and gather it.
I think it's a really interesting point as well. One of the things that really gets my goat is you fill out a form, you get a reference number, you've got a ticket, and the next thing you get a ticket, it's been closed. No, it hasn't. I really want to avoid us being that kind of organisation that does that. And on the customer service point, I've recently asked officers and Ben and Alex to investigate trying to get some customer service excellence certification, which would then drive a lot of this stuff you're talking about in terms of getting more customer feedback. But we have found getting customer feedback quite difficult. But do you want to elaborate on that? I know, are you able to, we've spoken a lot about that in the sort of briefings, or Ben? how difficult it is to get that feedback.
Yeah, I think we do have a range of tools, a Govmetric example on the website, and also the face-to-face interactions where people can give us a bit of a smiley face and then some comments. But actually, the engagement's been woefully low. Hasn't historically been like that. It's just since COVID, people are less interested in taking the time to give us feedback. I think your point you're making, though, Councillor Carter, is when we're doing some specific improvements in particular service requests or types of areas, that we should be going to those users and getting that specific feedback, which I think is absolutely right. So I think there's at the end of the paper, it talks about doing some more kind of system integration around kind of planning, environmental health and licensing. Now, as part of that, we would absolutely need to get some feedback from residents on what's not working from their end, as well as what we think isn't working within the system. So it's a really valid point. Yeah, and Councillor DeBont said the accreditation we're looking at is very heavy on how you're using customer feedback and the quantitative information to drive improvement. So yeah, we need to get a bit smarter at that.
Thanks, everyone. The recommendation for this item is detailed on page 121 of the agenda pack. That is that committee members consider the information in the report and make any recommendations to the executive in regard to digital exclusion. Can I have a proposer and a seconder for that, please? That's a welcome. Seconder, Councillor Clements, thank you. All those in favour? I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Our next item is, thank you to Councillor Dumont and officers for their attendance and their report. The next item 7, overview and scrutiny draft work programme. Before I ask Peter to speak to his report, I just wanted to talk to the committee about an email I've had from James Ellis, the Head of Legal and Democratic Services. James has said, could I request that going forward, if a scrutiny proposal form, which we're all familiar with, is not received by the time the draft work programme is considered at the meeting, immediately preceding the meeting at which the item in question is due to be considered, that it be automatically moved to the meeting after. In other words, if we get to this meeting and there's an item in the following meeting to be discussed.
Housing. Affordable housing in particular. Yeah.
Good example, housing. We're due to discuss housing at our next meeting, but we haven't yet submitted a housing scrutiny proposal form. That the item is automatically moved forward.
To June.
In this case, to June. Seeing a few puzzled faces. Did that make sense?
It's probably worth explaining that, for the sake of argument, if a scrutiny proposal form came in next week on the affordable housing topic, there probably wouldn't be time for the officer, Head of Housing and Health, to really react to that in an acceptable way, which wouldn't give them enough time to come back to what is a very broad, complex topic satisfactorily and take the leadership team and come back to a meeting in early March. There probably wouldn't be enough time to do that because it's such a huge topic and it wouldn't really give them time to come up with a satisfactory response to you. For that reason alone, there probably wouldn't be enough time now to take it in March.
So my feeling on this is this is not a one-size-fits-all situation where it's a relatively straightforward item. A short amount of time might be appropriate, something more substantial and so on. Sorry, I'll bring in Councillor Andrews.
Thank you. Looking at the programme, we've obviously cleared the first two items. We've then gone into housing, and the comment there is likely to be affordable housing. Now, if I learnt nothing else in 20 years in local government, all housing is affordable. We've determined that with virtually every DMC. Is it social housing? Do we mean social housing? What does the committee mean by affordable housing? That's the first one. The second one is, could somebody explain to me a little bit more around, I may have missed something having missed the last meeting, the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. Is that about how we're going to be using it, what we might be getting, where we might be putting it?
I think the point is until we've completed the scrutiny proposal form and that's gone around members and we've all had a chance to review it, then we haven't sufficiently defined what we mean by the topic. Councillor Boylan.
I think it makes absolute sense that scrutiny proposal forms form part of the agenda of these meetings and that we discuss that proposal and agree the proposal. It may need to be fine-tuned at this meeting and then we agree it and then it goes off for the next meeting. It just seems sensible to me. But that does mean that what happens on the 5th of March? Because we haven't got proposals for either of those two.
I'll bring Peter in on that.
On the 5th of March, I believe the exec member for one of the three exec members we need wasn't available for this meeting of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and I think with the chair's consent that has been moved to the March meeting for that. So that's what's coming to March, UK Shared Prosperity Fund, I think. Is that right, Ben?
Yeah, I can tell you what it is, Councillor Andrews. It's a look back at the £2.2 million we spent as part of the scheme in terms of all the stuff the money's been spent on, the outcomes, and then looking ahead to next year's transitional funding, some ideas of what it could be spent on. So it'll cover the scheme looking back and also going forward. I can put that in a form if needed, but that's what it'll cover.
Not everything on our forward programme needs scrutiny proposal form, because some of them are items brought by the executive to us for scrutiny. Parking strategy being a good example, is where we're asking the officers to do additional work, then we need the proposal form. Councillor Carter.
Thank you. Yes, I just had another sort of potential topic for the committee, just because I noticed this was triggered by reading an article about I think it was North Herts doing scrutiny, a committee doing a scrutiny of their Section 106 funding and how that's working, and how the money is being allocated, and is it being allocated effectively, and those kind of questions. And is that something that would be worth investigating? I mean, I think it would be not too difficult to find to make a fill in a proposal form for that if members thought it was worth looking at.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Peter to speak to his paper, and then we'll come back to that point and any others.
Yeah, I mean, it's the usual work programme report, which I'm inviting you now to think ahead well beyond March, because sort of looking June onwards beyond that, there's a few things listed here. We haven't sort of said which meetings you want them to go to. From the previous Overview Scrutiny Committee back in November 2023, I think it was, at that point, the development management forums were set up, and there's one of the actions there that we looked again within 2 years of that. Well, that's November this year. So to when the head of planning is happy to come and present that to you. So that's one thing to think about, the development management forums, so to look at review those. And then there's a few other things here which you've identified, like the anti-racism charter, for example. It's your chance now to say when you want things to come, and also to think about when we had a workshop in June of 1 year where you all got together and we looked at a few topics. There's an opportunity for that again if you want to, or you could all sort of have a discussion offline yourselves to agree some topics going forward. You could do that yourselves proactively to think what you want to do looking forward. It is supposed to be member-led, similar to what the chair said about the executive bringing things to you. That's fine, but also your work programme needs to be member-led. So there's a chance now for you to look beyond March into the new civic year and what do you want to look at. This is your chance now to think about that, either now or offline.
Specific welcome thoughts on the idea of a workshop. I'm personally slightly ambivalent about it, in that I can see reasons for it and reasons against it, but I'd like to be led by you in terms of whether you think that would be useful or not.
Well, I think, yeah, a short time limited workshop lubricated by bacon sandwiches and cups of tea. Other drinks are available, might be helpful. We seem to be heading towards a bit of a stalemate, and it might be we need to bust the jam. We need to unblock a few, get some thoughts going, get the juices emerging. The bacon bat normally does it for me.
Any other thoughts on that issue, Councillor Carter?
Yeah, I think it's important to refresh what you've decided on, so that you look at topics which are immediately important. So if you don't do that, then you risk just kind of bumbling along. So I think it's quite good to just take not a long workshop. If this is, as I've understood it, to come up with new topics, and perhaps I don't know if there's likely to be any kind of change in the makeup of the committee or anything like that, but it's always good to do a bit of a refresh, I think.
Miriam.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, just going back to the initial point, I think it's very reasonable that we should get the scrutiny proposal forms in. The officers must have adequate time to respond. I think the workshop is possibly a good idea, although I still think we're maybe not. We had a bit of information shared at the start of this cycle about the proposal we should be scrutinising executive decisions, and I still don't think we're particularly hitting that target some of the time.
Okay, so I think a consensus is emerging that a workshop would be useful. Whether we do it online or whether in person is something I'll give some thought to. I'll consult with Calvin. Any other comments on the forward work programme?
Before you vote on that, what I would say is that just like we had with the scrutiny proposal we had before, if one member is happy to take the lead on a proposal form and then complete it with talking with one or two other members, that's fine. I'd encourage that. So if some thought now, someone take the lead on the housing one and complete it and send it in, or other topics, that's fine. But the crux of it is we need the forms, please.
Anything else on this item? In which case, I beg your pardon, Councillor Carter.
Yeah, I just wonder if we could just have a word about that possible Section 106 proposal, if that was, I don't know if it could be added to the work, well, presumably it could be added to the work programme if I submitted a proposal and it was in time. But I would just like an idea of whether people would think that was worth doing.
Was that it?
That was a yes.
Right.
That'll be. I'd be happy to work with that.
Thank you.
I think the other one I put into the mix was Beam, which I think I vaguely remember a year or so ago. Kind of, it came up for discussion, and we said, well, let's give it time to bed in, and towards the end of 2025, we could pick that up. The end of 2025 is not next year anymore, so I'm interested if other people have any interest in that.
Thank you, Councillor Nichols.
I think I'm looking at S106 as well.
Do you want to come in? Was that? No. Okay. Right. In which case, can I have a proposer and a seconder that we accept the full programme as per Appendix 1?
Are we not editing it?
I haven't had any proposed edits.
Just about the housing is not on the 5th of March.
Fair point. Yeah, I think we've agreed that, and Section 106 will be on the long list, subject to the completion, etc., etc. Thank you. Yeah. Proposer? I'll let you decide which was which. All those in favour? Thank you. Any against? Any abstentions? I think that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. No urgent business, in which case I'll conclude tonight's meeting. Thank you very much.